What happens when one man tries to watch all of the sci-fi films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project, Sci-Fi Edition. We're rocking now with the sci-fi films of '83. This one's a bit fuller, thanks to the increase of Mad Max and Conan knockoffs. But seeing as how this is titled the Sci-Fi Edition, there's definitely some of those in there too. In fact, one of the biggest sci-fi films of all time is in here. We're starting this block with one that didn't have a set release date and is just known to have come out in 1983 in Italy. But it did get an American release in 1984, and it's I Sette Magnifici Gladiatori, or The Seven Magnificent Gladiators. We begin with a couple of dudes on the hunt for a witch named Anacora, and this guy with this vaguely Zardoz-like outfit is an evil warlord, making a nearby town give him offerings or he'll destroy their village. He leaves, claiming he'll be back for his prize, and local girl Pandora decides that she must do something. She's Carla Ferrigno, wife of Lou, and this was her very first acting work. And Anacora unveils the Sword of Achilles and decides to go search for warriors to help them defend the town. If you grab the sword and are unworthy, you get a shock and I guess pass out. They come across a charioteer, a Hull, and he's a bit of a badass, but Sturba, werewolf bitch, is also on hand, so let's count down how long it takes before they get her top off. Han declines to kill his opponent, which ticks off the Emperor, so they decide to condemn them both to death. But Pandora saves them with the sword and tosses it to Han. He and Scipio join their crew, as does Julia, and along the way they encounter a big dude named Goliath that also signs up. There's also this sneaky thief guy that tags along, and the group head back to the village to prepare for the evil Nisarode's return. If that basic plot structure sounds familiar to you, that's because this is like a sort of a take on the classic Japanese film, The Seven Samurai. That film has been remade over and over again in a variety of genres. The most famous was the Western, The Magnificent Seven, but there was also the sci-fi space version, Battle Beyond the Stars. That one also featured Sybil Danning, basically playing a similar role here. So, I guess you could call this a ripoff. An Italian ripoff. And when you say Italian ripoff 3 times, Bruno Mattei magically appears like Beetlejuice. And yep, he directed this one, eager to jump in on the Conan craze that was going on. But he's not the only notorious name here behind the scenes, because, like a bunch of Mattei rips, the script was by Troll 2 director Claudio Fragasso. So, the pair were meant to be handling a version of Hercules at this time, and it was reported that they would do it, and Ferrigno was attached, but Lou was the only one to win to do it. And we'll talk more about that one a little later on in the year, but that was filmed back to back with this one, which went into production first. It didn't get a lot of attention and was criticized for being perhaps too direct of a remake, although it has gone on to a cult success. And I'm giving this one a 3. It's pretty fun, although I admit that it's nothing special and ends up being predictable if you know the plot of Seven Samurai. Its SFCS is just a 2 since it's not all that well known and is rarely discussed, but it does have some recognizable names attached and Mattei and Fragasso on hand. Should you watch it? I mean, Sybil Danning's in this, so yeah. Let's go back to an entry with a known date, and we're moving to the small screen for February 27th, Starflight, the plane that couldn't land. We have Barney Miller as a plane designer, and he created the Starflight, the first ever hypersonic transport. But he has doubts, even though they're a day away from launch. He wants to postpone, but they're worried that that'll cost him, so they ignore him. The Countess is here, so hands off. And the pilot may be a fall guy, and his marriage is a bit rocky. But that's not all, because Bernie Lomax is here too, looking lively, and so is Peter Jason. The time of the big flight arrives and it launches, and look at all the guys in suits. I know that this is a movie, but it's the truth that people used to dress up to fly. It was like an occasion. But this was before the airlines all made sure to let you know just how much they hate you. But then, Freddie, a TV satellite CEO, has to scrap a rocket launch and they detonate it. And a bunch of debris from it heads straight for the Starflight. They have to climb higher to avoid it and get to a point where they're in anti-gravity. And there's hull damage, so they need a team to go up and refuel them. Turns out that it's not that easy, so they have to get Josh down to Earth to help them with the problem. And that just leads to complications and dudes getting sucked out into space. But then they have a limited amount of time and air, so they have to figure out how to get everyone down. But to do that, they have to get Josh down first to talk to the NASA guys, and he has to do that on Earth, even though they have a direct media link up and we're broadcasting live, but he has to go to Earth to talk to Shore. And this one was an ABC Sunday night movie and was directed by Jerry Jameson. And TV movies were his whole jam. We just saw him over on the Horror Project with the Linda Carter film Hotline, and he seemed to sort of specialize in these sort of disaster movies since he did Airport 77, Terror on the 40th Floor about a big building fire, Hurricane about a hurricane, and Heat Wave, a movie where everything gets really, really hot, otherwise known as Right Now. This one was primarily based on a book called Orbit, and it had the same basic plot setup, but changed around most of the other details. And what's funny is that this got released in some other countries, and a few that this was released as part of the Airport franchise, tagging it as Airport 85. And this was fine. It's a 2.5. It's basically any one of those airport movies, but in space. It has fun moments, and the cast is great, but it's really nothing new. Its significance is a 2, since it's not that well known, but it did have a big cast, and did alright in the ratings at the time. It just never really had any staying power. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's not bad, but it's pretty forgettable. We are now headed over to France for a film that debuted there on April 6th and didn't get a US run until 1984, and it's Leer Combat, or The Last Battle. We meet a man in a sort of a post-apocalyptic wasteland scavenging auto parts, trying to put together some sort of vehicle. No one can talk, and this gang of dapper guys are holding this guy hostage in order to crawl into small spaces to retrieve water. Our hero, known simply as The Man, sneaks into the gang's camp and kills their leader to take a car battery, causing them to chase after him. But he uses that battery to finish his plane and flies away. But then, there's a professional here, and when the man's plane crashes, he's forced to continue on foot. Things get a little weird though as it starts raining fish, but then the man brawls with the brute and winds up in the care of a man called the Doctor. With the use of a gas, the Doc is able to say a single word, bonjour, and after some struggle, the man is able to say it back. But then it turns out that someone else is there, a woman, and the brute repeatedly is trying to get inside. And this was the first feature film from Luc Besson, who would then go on to make the cult hit Subway, and his break through The Big Blue, and then his international sensation La Femme Nikita, before crossing over, making American hits like The Fifth Element. It would also mark the beginnings of his long collaboration with Jean Reno, although the two had already worked together on a short film. It marked a pretty sharp contrast to the Mad Max style of post-apocalyptic sagas that were cropping up everywhere at this time, and instead of giving us a violent series of chases, instead dealt with the human aspect of it. As opposed to those other films giving us very loud and frenetic encounters, this is very much the opposite and focuses on a number of quiet moments. Very quiet. There are literally 2 words spoken through the course of this entire movie. It got some strong reviews, with most praising its simple storytelling and ability to convey a strong story without dialogue, and went on to win several awards at a number of festivals, which nabbed it an American release. And this is pretty damn interesting. I'll give it a 3.5. It's one that I don't see myself rewatching very often, but it was cool to see a whole film done with no dialogue and just told through actions. Its significance is just a 2, though, because it's pretty damn obscure, although it's Besson's first film and had Renault in it, but it's not much talked about unless you're specifically seeking out the director's older work. Should you watch it? Yes, quietly. Okay, I hope you're ready for this next one because I'm not sure that I am. And this one didn't have a set release date, and it's only said to be released in 1983, and it's The Prodigal Planet. We find out that the nuclear war has ravaged the entire planet, and a man named David Michaels is being held by the government and told to renounce his faith. And besides the Bible quote at the beginning of the film and mentions of the word Lord several times in the first 5 minutes, it's clear that this is a Christian film. And if that stuff didn't tell you, then the awkward opening music would.
Your only hope is Jesus.
David is rescued by a woman from the Believers Underground, and she recruits him for a mission to take a module to the underground. And he takes her to meet a guy named Matthew Turner in this big battle truck looking thing. And it seems like they know each other, and I'll come back to that in a bit. They talk about God's plan and judgments that they've been living through for several years, and that there's new plagues on their way. There's boils coming, bloody seas, heat, darkness, and rivers drying up, then hail, and a big battle. And it's said that during that battle, Jesus will return and fix everything. And like isn't his dad all powerful? Isn't there a quicker and easier way to do that? Along the way, they find a mother and daughter, and this mom didn't get raptured because she devoted her life to that most blasphemous of careers, scientific research. How dare she? Everyone follows the Antichrist here, planning on overthrowing God, and soon enough those pesky plagues start happening. And this was actually part 4 of a series called A Thief in the Night, which was sort of a precursor to Left Behind in a way. Like, this is the finale of the saga, with the first film called A Thief in the Night from 1972, and then A Distant Thunder in 1978, An Image of the Beast in 81, and I suppose I could have covered that here back on the 81 episodes, but I thought I missed it. And the character of David Michaels was introduced in the previous film, with the character of Matthew Turner appearing in all 4. This one was released in 2 parts, screening at a number of Christian drive-ins and churches. They would do a 2-part thing where the first hour was shown one night and the second hour shown the next because, yep, this sucker is 2 hours long. It originally wasn't intended to be the ending of the series as they were planning a 5th film called The Battle of Armageddon, but it never made it to the production phase. And oh man, this is boring. This is a 2. And it gets a little extra because of the fun Mad Maxy stuff, although there's really not enough of it. But it's just so dull. There's literally a 15 to 20 minute section where they sit around and discuss Bible passages. Its SFCX is a 1.5 since it's not that well known, and even those that know this series barely know this entry. Should you watch it? I mean, if you're rusty on your Bible passages and want a refresher, maybe?
Unit 616, go ahead.
Oh man, MCU has really gone downhill. We're now going back over to Italy for one that came out there on April 10th and got a US release in January of 1984, and it's one I've recently covered on a video of Mad Max ripoffs, and it's The New Barbarians, also known as Warriors of the Wasteland. It begins in 2019, and there's a nuclear war that destroys most of humanity, leaving only a barren wasteland in its wake. There's this tiny settlement, and they're attacked by a group of marauders called the Templars, who attack them with laser beams. Their leader is a dude named One, played by George Eastman, who we just saw in the Bronx Warriors, so Mad Max clones were his jam. And I guess in a counterpart to the last movie,
Books.
But then we meet our hero, Scorpion, who pulls up in a car that has a bubble roof, and here's a pretty inside joke. He meets a zombie from the movie Hysterical.
What the
He encounters the famous Bob, and he once again has a ridiculously inappropriate voice.
Hey, I can't believe you've come here like only to play.
Seems that Scorps used to be a member of the Templars but left them behind. He rescues a woman named Alma and is watched by an inglorious bastard who we just saw in the Bronx Warriors, and also Warrior of the Lost World, so he really liked Mad Max clones. And when I covered that film in the last episode, I said that he was in Italy making a movie and then asked to be on that one in order to extend his visa, and this is that movie. Like the Road Warrior, Scorpion agrees to help out a small caravan and protect them from the Templars, except he gets captured. And this movie does something that I'm pretty sure that not many action movies have done. The hero is tied up and sodomized by the villain of the film. And this was by Enzo Castellari, and yes, he also directed the Bronx Warriors and was known to capitalize on current trends. He made The Last Shark, possibly the biggest Jaws ripoff there is, and was really in a post-apocalyptic mode here, as this was one of 4 or 5 films he did that were pretty similar. The budget was incredibly low, and the time factor was very limited. It's said that the 3 Mad Max ripoff films Castellari did in this time frame, this, Bronx Warriors, and Escape from the Bronx, were all completed in 6 months. Total, from writing to completion of filming. Even though it wasn't singled out by censors, the company that distributed the film decided to tone down Scorpion's rape scene, although future releases would restore it to its full version. And this is okay, it's a 2.5. It's mostly the same stuff we've seen before, but a touch duller. But it does have its moments. Its significance is a 2, since it sort of blends in with the other number of films from this same theme, from this same time period, and didn't really leave an impact. Should you watch it? Possibly. I mean, it's not a bad one. I like some of it, but it's not essential viewing at all. Here's one that got a premiere on April 15th, my birthday, in Boston. So it feels like it's a gift to me. But it got a little bigger and still limited release on July 20th. And get ready for Rock and Rule. We find out that there was a big war and only animals survived, and they mutated. And since then, a guy named Mock, who is also a rock star, is looking for a magic voice to complete some dark experiment to raise up a dark being from another realm. He's looked all over and can't find it, but then stumbles into a dive bar in Little Ohmtown, where a rock band is playing with Omar, Angel, Dizzy, and Stretch, and Omar is voiced by Paul Lamont. Well, if you're in the US, and we'll come back to that. When they play music, it's actually Cheap Trick, but when Angel does her solo thing, it's Debbie Harry, or Blondie, I guess. Did you call her Blondie when she's not performing with Blondie? Turns out that Angel's voice is exactly what Mock is looking for, so he calls him up to his mansion, where he offers her a spot on his tour without the rest of the band. When she turns him down, he kidnaps her and drugs the boys and kicks them out, so they have to head up to Nuke York to try to stop him. Meanwhile, Mock discovers that his plans can be ruined by the magic of one voice and one song. But whose voice? And whose song? And along the way, there's more music, notably from Lou Reed and Iggy Pop, and eventually Earth, Wind & Fire. And this animated treasure is from Clive A. Smith. And he had done a few things before this that were also animated, and would continue on in this world doing some TV episodes and animated features, but then really switched into producing them, and was a huge force behind dozens of animated shows. It was from a company called Nelvana, and it was their first animated feature, although they had previously done the notorious Boba Fett bit from the Star Wars Holiday Special. But then they shifted to sticking to kids' TV, like the Care Bears and Babar and such. It was originally created as a kids' film called Drats, but over time they decided to switch to a more mature tone and make the characters more human than animal. It was really expensive for a small studio and cost around $8 million, going $3 million over budget and straining Nelvana until they nearly went out of business. Originally, they wanted a star name like David Bowie or Tim Curry to play Mock, and even considered Michael Jackson and Sting, but then decided that they couldn't afford them and hired Don Franks. Also, some of Stretch's lines were originally done by Howie Mandel, but he then moved to Los Angeles and didn't have time to complete the work, so Greg DeFell was brought in to finish the job and redo all the lines. Fun fact, one of the characters that's in the film for a short bit is voiced by Catherine O'Hara during her SCTV days. But then, problems arose when MGM picked it up for distribution and objected to a couple of things. They added a new bit to the beginning to explain why the people were part animal and toned down the language. But, most importantly, they hated Greg Salata as the voice of Omar and had him recast, redoing all of his lines. In the end, though, they had no confidence in the film and only gave it a tiny release where it managed to earn a whopping $30,000. There was a comic book tie-in that was basically just stills from the movie, though, and I used to have that. I wish I still did. Since then, it's gained a pretty solid cult following due to some cable runs and passionate fans. And sadly, due to the contracts of the recording artist and the lack of interest in promoting the film, there's never been an official soundtrack release, which is a shame because it's damn good stuff. And man, do I love this. I'm giving it a 4. It's a little wonky at times, but the songs are great. The animation's awesome, and I dig it. Its SFCS is just a 2 though, since it's very cult, and that cult ain't that big, but it did cement Nelvani, even if it did almost kill them. Should you watch it? Hell yeah! Do it for Uncle Mikey. This next one is actually a South African film, but got a premiere in the US on April 29th and had a run in its native country later on in August, and it's Survival Zone. It's in the far-off future of 1989, and a voiceover tells us that nuclear war has destroyed the world, and there's only pockets of survivors left. And we meet hunky, shirtless Adam, and his family is all dead now. There's these roving motorcycle gangs playing jousting with chains and killing each other for fun. There's also a nearby convent that they attack, killing everyone, and come across their leader, and who's Big Man. And you know he's big because the back of his jacket tells you. He's mad because the women all kill themselves before they can get their hands on them. There's also a farm where the guy who's not Dave from 2001 is here, and they're trying to find other survivors. And they have a young girl there and a little boy as well. Soon, though, those bikers find the farm and try to defend themselves, but they're outgunned and manned. When they try to head out, they run headlong into Adam. He agrees to help them and reveals that the gang are cannibals and ate all the nuns, while Rachel eyes him up like a box lunch herself. And I don't know how much of a compliment I would take that. Like, on one hand, she's looking at you like you're the only man she's seen in 3 years, and on the other, you're the only man that she's seen in 3 years that she's not related to. Together, they all decide to take a stand, and this one is from a guy named Percival Rubens. He only directed a handful of films, but started back in the mid-60s. It was from South Africa and was clearly yet another one that was inspired by The Road Warrior, although this version of a post-apocalyptic world is about as low rent as it gets, as everything just sort of looks like it normally does. Like, this is supposed to be after a nuclear war destroyed everything and killed everyone just a couple of years ago, and no one's worried about fallout or radiation or whatever. And this is just a bore. It's a 1.5. Not much happens, and what does happen happens very slowly, and this movie can't even make a shovel decapitation fun. Its significance is just a 1 because it's not talked about, and mostly for good reason since there's not much going on here. Should you watch it? Easy skip. A month later, on May 20th, we're back in America with one that's a bit more familiar, and it's Space Hunter: Adventures in the Forbidden Zone. We're in deep space, and this sort of cruise ship is passing between a couple of suns and gets into an accident, and a number of escape pods make it to nearby planets in these funky helmets that seem incredibly impractical. However, the natives aren't friendly and immediately attack them. Meanwhile, a guy named Wolf gets a call from a very familiar sounding voice that may or may not have straightened Slinky.
And the police called from the 42 sector. You got 105 parking tickets. I think you should take care of that. And your ex-wife is looking for you. She hasn't gotten a check from you in 3 months.
Wolf finds out that there's a big bounty for retrieving the 3 surviving women. The backstory of the planet is that they were colonized in 2013 and had a massive plague in 2021. So, close enough. Wolf can't pass up all that money and touches down just in time to help out a small group of colonists fighting off a band of marauders. They kidnap the women and take them into the Forbidden Zone, so Wolf has to give chase, even though his robot companion is destroyed. He's not alone for long, though, because he encounters a thief who's not exactly pretty in pink here, and she tags along. And meanwhile, the women are taken away to be prepared for a guy named the Overdog. And hey, you're pointing that awful close, man. What is this, 3D or something? He then meets up with, hey, what do you know, another Ghostbuster, who's another rival hunter. And together, they have to try to get their bounty by facing down that Overdog. And it's good old Michael Ironsides, who we just saw over on the Horror Project with the Sins of Dorian Gray. And Egon and Winston aren't the only Ghostbuster links here, since it was also produced by Ivan Reitman as well, but it was directed by Lamont Johnson. And he'd been directing for a long time, although there's not much in his filmography similar to this, either before or after. And even though it's not as blatant with the things poking at you, but this was actually made in 3D and was part of that small boom that was going on at the time. But Johnson wasn't the original director. Jean Lafleur was on board, but was fired after 2 weeks, as the studio was unhappy with what they were seeing. Because of this, changes were made to the film and script, although the cast seemed to prefer the new director, and things went very smoothly after that, with Molly Ringwald particularly happy as she thought her dialogue was crap in the original version, and Johnson asked for a number of changes for her. The budget was pretty beefy at around $14 million, and the release really pushed the 3D angle, and had a strong opening weekend with a $7 million haul, but then fell dramatically and only ended up totaling around $16 million in the end. But that may have had something to do with the competition that arrived just 1 week later, which we'll talk about shortly. Oh, and also, if you blink, you'll miss him, but here's Colin Mochrie in his first film role ever, which he gets no points for, but it's okay because they're just made up anyway.
You can ask the chemists.
No, wait, you got me mixed.
And this is fun enough. I'm giving it a 3. It's a really very standard plot, but told in a fun enough way, and Ringwald and Hudson steal the show. Its significance is a 3 as well, since this was somewhat popular due to cable runs and video stores, but never really took off as a property, and had a bunch of names attached to it. Should you watch it? It's probably worth a trip into this zone, sure.
Okay, what did you do to this?
Emergency repair procedure number 1.
You kicked it?
Well, it's pretty easy to see why Space Hunter would have a tough time at the box office, because just a few days later, on May 25th, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, was crushing everything else. It begins shortly after The Empire Strikes Back, and that darn Empire is building yet another Death Star because everything went so smoothly with the first one. But think about it. Why wouldn't they? Oh no, you destroyed our giant space weapon, but we're this massive universe-spanning empire. We can make more, and more, and more. Since Han has been frozen in carbonite and sent to space gangster Jabba the Hutt, they first have to go and rescue him. And come on, why am I explaining the plot to you? Like, you've seen this before, right? I guess I will, though, because that's what we do. So, Jabba is this massive thing, and this is why I love this era. This thing is completely practical and took like 6 guys to operate. And it looks great. And every other film that they tried to have him in, they did him digital, and nothing is even close to as convincing as this is. And hey, speaking of unconvincing, this is one of the new versions, so we have to sit through this crap. But at least the Rancor is still the real deal, and we also meet the crazy Sarlacc pit. And they make this big deal about how it slowly digests you over 1,000 years, but like, first of all, they're people. They don't live that long. And secondly, starvation or thirst will kill them first, so that would only take like a couple of days, so it's not really that horrible of a death. But being digested slowly over about 48 hours, like, it just doesn't sound as imposing. I guess that they say that like the Sarlacc pit keeps you alive, or that doesn't make any sense. But then, this movie commits crime number one, and that's the sort of random and anticlimactic death of supposed badass Boba Fett. This was because Lucas was unaware that the character was popular and simply saw him as a basic side character, and only discovered that people liked him after the film was released, and audiences were bummed, and regretted not giving him a more grandiose death. Also, Carrie Fisher was super unhappy about her role here, being jammed into a bikini for a big portion of the film, which she hated, thought he was joking when she was first shown the outfit. Audiences really loved it though. Later in the film, it commits its second huge mistake, and one of the more notorious ones. It introduces the Ewoks, cuddly teddy bears ripe for merchandising everywhere. In the original script, they were going to be Wookiees, but the decision was made to switch them from tall, long-furred things to short, fuzzy ones, most likely because it'd be more appealing to kids. So, before filming, Lucas asked Ivan Kershner to come back to direct, but since he had spent the last 2 years working with Empire, he declined. He also asked Spielberg, but there were issues with the Directors Guild that made that an impossibility. Then, things got weird, since he also approached David Lynch, since he had just won an Oscar for The Elephant Man, but he said no, as he thought it was Lucas's thing. David Cronenberg was also considered, but he only wanted to work on movies that he himself wrote, and also passed. Apparently, Space Hunter's Lamont Johnson was also considered, but the role finally went to Richard Marquand, and he hadn't done much in the genre before, and wouldn't do a lot after either. He only made 3 more films after this before passing away in 1987. I should point out that the whole reason why Solo was frozen at the ending of the last one was because Harrison Ford was only contracted to do 2 movies, and they were unsure whether or not he'd come back for a third, and they wrote the bit in case he said no, but in fact expected him not to since his star had risen since then. The character wasn't even in the original script, but they eventually convinced him to come back, and Ford suggested killing Han off, sacrificing himself to save the others. But yeah, I mean, they ain't killing Han. Well, I mean, not here. It was originally going to be called Revenge of the Jedi, and a ton of the early marketing called it that, including posters. But a few months before, it was decided that Revenge wasn't something Jedis cared about, and swapped it for Return, which was his original working title on the script. The budget was beefy at around $40 million, but it was a massive success, earning that back in its opening week alone. Over its run, it earned over $250 million worldwide, and through several re-releases, has added to that total to bring it into around $500 million. And even though the reviews were pretty good, they weren't great, and fans weren't quite sold. The ending was considered too much a copy of the first film, and the Ewoks weren't quite Jar Jar hated, but they were pretty unliked. Except by kids. Kids freaking love them. And you know, I take offense to Dante from Clerks referring to them as a bunch of Muppets. Ewoks aren't Muppets, they're guys in suits. 2 different things. There's some Muppets in Jabba's palace, but you can't be mad about those because they're pretty badass. Also, this was considered the end of the saga and remained as such for around 15 years until the prequels arrived to crap all over its legacy. And I don't care if you guys have this new love for them now, because they sucked then and they suck now.
It's a trap!
And I'll give this one a 4. Again, I have no real passion for Star Wars. I liked it growing up, but then I lost interest, and it's never been a thing for me like it has been for others. That said, I love the first half of this one so much, and all the Jabba stuff is fantastic, and exactly what I want from these movies. The second half, well, I mean, it's fine. And it's so uneven that I was going to give it a 3.5, but then that scene happens where the Ewok tries to wake up its dead friend, and I cried a little. I gave it a 4. Its SFCS is a 5. Come on, it's Star Wars. There's no way this was ever going to be anything but a 5. I don't even need to explain it. You get it. Should you watch it? You have, but do it again and fast forward through that new horrible Max Rebo segment. Seriously, why would you do that to me? Our final film of this block came just 2 days later in Italy, even though it wouldn't release to the US until February of '84, and it's The Blade Master, although the original title is Ator 2: Orion the Invincible. It has a bunch of cavemen going nuts, but also this guy named Akranos telling his daughter about his new discovery, a device that he's afraid will fall into the wrong hands and be used as a weapon. He decides to call on Ator, and we get a recap of the first Ator movie, and then we catch up to our hero, once again played by Kilometers O'Keefe. Turns out that the evil Zor, who has one hell of a mustache and bangs combo going on that seems to recall the guy from the last film, is after the device, so Mila goes off to find the hunky Ator. She finds him, but is wounded while doing so he has to feel her up a bit to heal her. Like really, it's vital to his healing process that he have his hand on her bosom. Oh, and Ator has an assistant named Thong, and I didn't know he had such a cult following, but apparently this character has an entire Cisco song dedicated to him. They have to top the first film where Ator fights a literal shadow by throwing in a sequence where he takes on invisible opponents, so he literally just jumps back a few times? Like spare no expense, right? They then have to make their way back to the castle to save Akranos from Zor and retrieve the device, which is apparently called the Geometric Nucleus, facing down those cavemen and other shenanigans on the way. Of course, this is a sequel to Ator the Fighting Eagle, the film from just a handful of months ago. That one was a nice success, and its director Joe D'Amato had O'Keefe under contract, but only for a short amount of time. They decided to do a knockoff of Quest for Fire, a film about cavemen, and called it Adam and Eve. But as they were getting ready to do it, the actor backed out at the last minute due to religious reasons. Since they had that limited time for his contract, they rushed to do a sequel to Ator, putting it together quickly and starting to shoot with no script in place. This worked out since they were able to release the film around the time of Conan the Destroyer to cash in on the similarities. It's said that the film might have been released in Italy at the ending of 1982, although it's also been said that it only began shooting at the beginning of '83, and it's also said that it never had an official theatrical release there. It did get that US run in '84 as Blade Master, and also was retitled Cave Dwellers for some versions, and under that title it was featured in a pretty notorious episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000. It would be followed up by a third part, but not until 1987, and a fourth entry in 1990. And this is just a 1.5 for me. It's missing the silly parts of the original, and it's just a bunch of Barbarian-style cliches, and ends up just being sleep-inducing. Its significance is a 1.5 as well, since it's gotten a touch of notoriety and a small cult following, but it's still very much on the obscure side. Should you watch it? Nah, I mean there's lots of other Conan clones that are more worth it. So there you have it, a bunch of the sci-fi and related films, technically the genre films of this particular chunk in time. My favorite from this block, I know you're all going to be mad at me about not picking Return of the Jedi, but my favorite of this block is Rock and Rule. I'm sorry, I love it. I was going to wear my Rock and Roll t-shirt, but I put this one on instead. It's just fun. I don't know, I have a ton of nostalgia for it that I don't have for Star Wars at this particular point. But let me know your favorite down below in the comments. Let me know which of these you've seen, what you haven't seen, and what you'd now like to see. Tell me that down below. Also, if you enjoyed the project, hit that like button. If you like the channel, subscribe to it. Maybe hit the bell so you get notified about new videos, and check out my Patreon page like these guys over here do. Also, keep on coming back because there's still plenty more sci-fi to go right here in the year 1983 on the 80s Project.